Hello and welcome to Slim Ignite 2020. In the coming months and days, businesses are more focused towards digital strategies and everyone's being tested on resilience. The key to all of this is to look at the brighter side of how do we realign our value propositions, business strategies, and how do we go on further. What's more alarming is that how do we manage this crisis? How do we come out of this? And what's interestingly that we see these days is how e-commerce businesses and various other channels coming into the existence of showing greater stunts in realigning Sri Lanka as well as its business strategies. Today, to speak to you on the topic of COVID-19 and a call for digital transformation, we're very honored to speak to the Director General of Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, who is also a board member of SL-CERT, the Sri Lanka's apex body for cybersecurity. He comes with a wealth of experience in previously heading a premier IT and digital services company in Sri Lanka, engaged by majority of blue chips in the country in driving forward its digital strategies. And he headed the multiple startup ventures, which included a diversified portfolio with a focus on technology. Very honored to have with us Mr. Oshada Senanayake joining us on this digital discussion here with you. Thank you, sir. Good morning. How's it going for you?
Good morning, Sharon. Quite good, keeping safe. I wouldn't want to be at any other place than in Sri Lanka right now.
Now, to start off with, first question for you, Mr. Oshada Senanayake. COVID-19 has spread across the globe, bringing a lot of tragedy to humanity as well as to our global economy. As the spread continues, more and more enterprises are now focusing towards organizational objectives. There are the conversations that are taking place regarding financial targets. How do we achieve them? Where do we go about with it? Based on your experience, how do you see this going further? Where are we headed?
I think, Sharon, it's an interesting question to start off with. And I think organizations has to go beyond just linear strategical approaches right now. And I think it's a time for emergent strategies to be put in place. I believe as much as the COVID-19 pandemic is a downturn across the globe, I think it offers quite a lot of opportunities for organization to realign itself, come up with new digital strategies, to come up with new business models. And I think it's becoming imperative that they do as well in the survival of the fittest, I would say. And I think that's where organizations has to drive forward to. And if you look at this time, I believe it's a time to look back and realign yourself and be ready to basically take on the next steps after the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mr. Oshada Senanayake, with your past experience in working with startups and blue chip companies, we see that a CIO's role has completely changed. It seemed to be like he's playing a dominant role today, as we see a number of changes that has come into place with the crisis of COVID-19. Now, what are the tips that you would like to give to a CIO, or what are the initiatives that you would like to propose?
I think, Sharon, the CIO's role was quite crucial even before the pandemic. I think the CIO's role was the catalyst between the enterprise strategy that comes on from the leadership, and where the CIO role pretty much syncs up that strategy alongside the IT strategy of an organization. And I believe it has become more crucial right now in terms of the current situation, where there's a lot of realignment that would have to happen from IT perspective as well. I mean, when we talk about IT, it's not just simply infrastructure. The IT governance aspects has to really change over as well, where we are at a paradigm shift of literally 90% or even 100% of your workforce is working from home. So that brings into light quite a few challenges in terms of IT governance and in terms of realigning your business continuity plans. So in that sense, I think the CIO has a crucial role to play in terms of business continuity, but more so, as I mentioned earlier, with this being a time for emergent strategies coming into play, technology is going to be the underlying piece. And that's where the CIO's role is going to be much more interesting and much more crucial for organizations, because the realignment is certainly going to be completely pivotal around the technology piece. And that's where I think the CIO's role is very important for any organization. Now, the typical scenario or the typical consensus is that the CIO role is associated only with the larger sets of companies. It is not. Even if it's a startup, although you might not have a CIO designate, it's a role that someone would have to play. So I think what's crucial is looking at the role and ensuring that role is played in any organization in the digitalization strategy post COVID.
What's the impact of technology in the business environment today with the COVID crisis?
I think, as mentioned earlier, it's a paradigm shift. I mean, there was digitalization that kept on happening. Digitalization is always a roadmap that we looked upon, but right now I think there's quite a lot of memes online as well, right? I mean, if you really ask who drove your digitalization from organizational perspective, or even for that matter from a country perspective, well, you'd have to answer that is COVID, right? But I think coming back to the point, I think it's again the shift of the user behaviors in terms of their lifestyles, in terms of how they replenish the essentials. I think it's moved over online. So I think it's about time that businesses literally look at scenarios of these newfound requirements, right? People has to distance themselves whether they like it or not. They have to work from home. They have to replenish the stocks or the essentials from home. So how do businesses align to that? I mean, infrastructure is there. It's up for the taking. It's just that you need to ensure that you adapt onto that technology that's available to ensure that there's new business models. As I always say, there's three types of strategies for organization. One is, I mean, there are three horizons. The first horizon is you defend your existing business, and the second is you look at adjacent businesses, new business model. But the third horizon was literally looking at absolutely genuinely new business models. I think that's where we are pushed on to now. So to answer your question, I think it's not only online. It's how you look at realigning your supply chains. How well can you basically set your value proposition that was set earlier on to COVID, where we were on a completely traditional approach. So I think it's about realigning your supply chains, realigning your value proposition from an organizational perspective. That is what's important. Technology is there for the taking. It's just that how do you align it? And as I mentioned earlier, that's where the CIO also comes into play as well. And it's not only the CIO. Digitalization has to come from the top. It's like IT governance. It's got to come from the leadership of organization, and the CIO will just pretty much ensure, as I mentioned, that it would be driven through and it would be pretty much executed. But the vision has to come from the top, and the digitalization is not something that you can just put a website online and then expect it to be a new business. It's got to be, as I mentioned, about realigning our value proposition.
Mr. Oshada Senanayake, we see a lot of people who have changed in terms of behavior. We've seen a number of people getting involved in comes to the usage of WhatsApp, different e-learning platforms. Telcos are interested as well. As the Director General for TRC, how do you see this as a role in the change of behavior? What is your perspective on this?
Very interesting question, Sharon. And since you mentioned about TRCSL's role as well, I think it's important that I delve a bit onto that as well. So, as you mentioned, the telecommunications infrastructure has been pivotal at this time. And I think TRC has been one of the first government agencies to go online and leverage on the existing digitalization plan we already have implemented by the time that we had to come up with the situation of the COVID-19 earlier on last month. So, our role has been literally ensuring that the required connectivity pretty much seamlessly carries on in ensuring the connectivity required for essential services, the work from home aspects that the organizations was banking on. The economies are retracted worldwide, but there are certain businesses in Sri Lanka that still could go on a work from home basis. And it's very important because these are businesses that would still bring in foreign exchange to the country. So we had a scenario where it was a telecommunication network that was geared for literally, I would say, 1/10 of this traffic right now, which we are experiencing. The whole nation is online within just a few days. And that shift was never expected. So for us, it was working with the other stakeholders around us, importantly the service providers, the telecommunication operators, in ensuring capacity balancing, capacity planning, right? And I think what's important is, as much as we look at the current scenario, how do we look at a post-COVID scenario? Because I don't believe that this is going to go back to the same situation that we were. There's going to be a persistent 40% of traffic or 40% of utilization that will be still prevalent after COVID, on alignment that is done by businesses to ensure online working, work from homes, and also the digitalization piece. So there's a lot more consumption of data and connectivity that's going to be prevalent. So we have to look forward. We had to look a couple of years ahead, and we've already started discussions with the telco operators in looking at capacity planning, the required infrastructure enablements. These are important factors we need to understand. And I think in terms of the situation, I think we've done quite a lot of initiatives in tandem with government initiatives that's on as well. We've given directives to ensure that connectivity is not disrupted, albeit the fact that whether people have paid or not. We've ensured there are short codes that was introduced across the board in ensuring people can access these very important critical services. So there's a lot of aspects that we've been working on as TRCSL. And we've taken some bold strides as well in terms of enabling certain aspects of the government services as well to digitize. So one example is the judicial services. It's a small pilot project, but we've ensured connectivity to certain prisons where you can still continue with the court proceedings on a remote basis. You need to pretty much bank on transporting people back and forth, and it could be done completely digitally. So these are strides that we are making. We are supporting these initiatives, and we are acting as a catalyst as well in ensuring we play a role. And it's critical. The time to market in these initiatives is very important. I think it's you'd have to bootstrap a lot of aspects. And again, I need to reiterate the fact that the management of these scarce resources is what's critical. I mean, we've gone into next strides as well in introducing educational channels, for example. We need to not forget the next generation that's at home as well. We have to ensure that they're engaged. As much as we talk about engaging workforces, it's also important that we engage the student base as well. So in that hindsight, we've looked at engaging with our stakeholders again in ensuring there's content delivery across the board. We've ensured that e-learning platforms for the government is right now freely accessible. So if you look at the Learn e-learning system for state universities, it's literally completely free to be accessed. The e-Takshalava, which is the K-12 system from grade 1 to grade 12 or 13, that is also accessible free of charge. So I hope that people are utilizing this, and we can certainly see that people are using these as well for the benefit of these segments. So this is just a quick summary of what we've been doing around the clock for the last few weeks.
Mr. Senanayake, thank you very much for your input and for hard work in covering up all these areas. But one of the things that we hear a lot of businesses and institutions is that this is just a temporary thing that we're doing online, we're getting online, and then we'll go back to our lives. What is your recommendation when it comes to a decision or change? Because some of them want to look at the positive, some of them want to move forward as well.
I think I disagree on that point of the perception that everything is going to go back to the norm we had pre-COVID scenario. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Sharon, there's going to be a persistent set of activities that's going to be shifted far away in terms of the user journey, in terms of utilizing services, the purchasing patterns. So I think it's not going to be the same ever. But of course, there'll be certain aspects that'll go back to the normal. But there's certainly going to be very strong drive in terms of from the business as well as from the consumer front of expectations are going to be different, right? The consumption of services, I truly believe, will be shifted online. Not 100% right now as we go along. It's, as I say, digitalization is always a journey. It's a roadmap. It's a journey towards complete digital transformation. But I think we are right now forced into a point that people have to avail these services. I mean, just 5 weeks back, a shopping spree over the weekend was the family outing, right? Now, when we expect it to be the next week, hopefully, fingers crossed, we can open up the country again. I'm not too sure, but it all depends on the advice we get. But if we do, again, I believe we'd have to take precautions in terms of ensuring that we continue that safety measures that we've been told to adhere to continually. And how else can it be done except adapting to certain digital initiatives? So our lifestyles are certainly going to change. The consumption of content is online right now. The purchasing patterns have shifted online, and I think it's here to stay.
Mr. Senanayake, a lot of people enjoy going to work and working behind a desk. Some of them are working on the field. But when it comes to working from home, you're constantly behind your laptop. and you are working full time, there has been an increase. Some of them balance themselves as well. But with the use of artificial intelligence and data as well, how do you see the perspective or change that's taking place?
I believe the work from home culture, as you mentioned, look, there are pros and cons of it. I think the pros pretty much outweigh the cons on this as well. I think the key imperative is that the workforce is on a much more work life balanced perspective. I mean, you are relaxed in thinking beyond what you usually thought over. You are thinking beyond the traditional work time straight forward, so you have a bit of agility and flexibility in terms of how you give back to the organization that you work for. But however, it's also important that you understand the fine line between work life balance again. So again, the fact that when you're working in an office, you would traditionally work within a finite timeline, right? It could be 8:30 to 5:30, or the IT environments and all that continues to go beyond that, for example. But I think what's important is that you yourself look back and align yourself in how you utilize this work from home concept. But I think in terms of the AI pieces and all that, I mean, those are data driven aspects that's going to be more and more utilized by your organization in making decisions. It's got to be data driven. I believe it was already up there from a couple of years back. I mean, your organizations had to be making decisions on a data driven aspect. But I would say the work from home, I think, is going to offer another paradigm change in how we engage with our workforces as well, and vice versa. So I think it's a culture piece that again organizations have to set up in gaining the best out of this. So you'd certainly still have to have certain control mechanisms, of course. But I think teleworking, work commuting, and the work from homes these are not new concepts. These were concepts in play. But what I believe is in Sri Lanka right now, I mean, if you take the TRCSL, we've been working from home from March 20th, even before the government directive, just because we had the platforms in place, and this was the perfect opportunity for us to test the platforms that we've been implementing. So I think it's going to change not only for the private sector, it's going to also change the way the public sector works as well. Because as more importantly, as I always said, as much as the private sector is going to take paradigm changes and new business models being outlined, it's very important that the public sector services also align with that push. We have to align with the same momentum that would be required in doing this transformation of businesses, the digital transformation. And I think I can see a lot of synergies coming up together, and I think I can see that happening right now, which is a positive.
Mr. Senanayake, there has been a lot of meetings taking place online, webinars, conferences, different discussion platforms. A lot of them are giving very good insights, and we've seen you taking part in some of them as well. How do you see this engagement? What sort of a prospect is it for companies to take on further or forward?
I think the webinars has been a very interesting channel in terms of answering a lot of questions that were out there. Whether you are a business owner, whether it's a SME or a startup, I mean, it is very interesting to see the types of questions that came across in these webinars. So I think I think of course you need to do the digital penetration. You need to advertise the webinars as required. I see quite a few of them coming up right now, and I think what's important is the balance of the panels on those webinars. But as long as the key topic is well articulated and the panelists are aligned to that topic, I think I've seen from my experience partaking in about 3 to 4 webinars across the last 4 weeks, there's been very interesting questions coming up. Now, what's important here is that during a scenario where the typical cohesion that has been broken out, and you're literally at home, disjointed from the traditional meetings. I mean, these are opportunity where these questions could be answered, and then the people could. I mean, there's been so many questions. I mean, what should we do on going online? Should we go into certain types of business models? How should we balance the workforce right now with the digitalization? So there's been very interesting questions, and also questions in terms of utilizing current infrastructure as well. So I think it's a good platform if used in the right objective way to send out those answers to those gray areas that a lot of people have.
Mr. Senanayake, as for our last question, the giants in the tech industry have taken COVID-19 as a big tech opportunity, which will detoxify their relationship with the society. And with these thoughts in mind, could you please suggest 3 takeovers to our viewers in how best that they could capitalize the big tech drive for their businesses, and something for the entrepreneurs as well as the online businesses as well.
Very interesting question, Sharon. So, as much as the situation has worked well for the giants, I don't believe it's only for the giants. I believe it's a reset and a marker where even the startups, the new business can start alongside on par with the new businesses. Take, for example, the retail environment right now. Okay, I mean, this was environment that was driven by larger supermarket chains, but you see even in Sri Lanka across the last few weeks, there's so many new startups cropping up in ensuring that they cater to that gap that even the larger corporates couldn't cater to. So, I mean, this is a positive situation where I believe it's the best time for a startup to leverage and to start on equal footing. I think it's the same for the country as well. I think as much as we looked at decades back where certain countries have taken a significant lead, I think right now is a time where everything is reset. And now is the time to actually come up with a very, very strong approach in thinking of industrialization from a local perspective. I think I think it's happening right now. I mean, we've got our own ventilators coming out day in and day out from different starters of communities. We see walk-in sanitizers coming in. There's a lot of initiatives that's been taken. We've got our own ICU beds, for example, right? So the same way, I mean, with the whole vision, even from a government perspective of giving opportunities for technology that is completely homegrown, I think these are certain opportunity for all the tech startups to piggyback on this opportunity. I mean, there's going to be a lot of digitalization across the public sector as well as the private sector. So this is a time that you can engage, realign, and come up with innovative products that you are assured that you'd be given a prominence, rather than just looking at international products in itself. So what we believe is actually it's got to be the technology or the know-how transfer, but the products should come out of Sri Lanka. And I think right now we've got a very positive rhetoric going in terms of driving through the Made in Sri Lanka concept.
Are we getting anything for free, Mr. Senanayake?
Well, we've already got quite a few things free online, I mean, I think what we need to look out for is not freebies anymore, but to look at innovative options where you can make a very strong, sustainable business model. Free, yeah, of course. I mean, there's been quite a few. I mean, I'll take this question from a TRC perspective. I mean, there's quite a lot of options that we worked with the telcos in ensuring and catalyzing the work from home initiatives. Last month there was data develop plans, and more importantly and more pragmatically, the student base, as I always said, look, I mean, they've got free access to all e-learning systems online. I think that's where we've been taking a very paradigm shift in providing these free services, but objectively. So I don't think there'll be freebies across the board, but objectively we've already given quite a lot of free incentives. And even the connectivity, for example, I mean, irrespective of payment status, I mean, the telcos all have aligned with our request and the government's request in ensuring that connectivity goes on. So I mean, it's a huge risk for these service providers as well, and I think they've taken it up from a national perspective, and kudos to them.
Thank you, Mr. Senanayake. Thank you for your very valuable time for joining us on the Slim Ignite 2020. We're here enlightening our viewers and marketing professionals as well as every other industry expert who have joined us on this very exclusive discussion to how do we cope ourselves with the ongoing crisis which is prevailing around the globe. Stay tuned with us as we come to you in our next episode. Until then, stay home, stay safe.